Right out here. Well, very good. If you're ready.
I'm ready.
Good. All right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, or welcome back. So my name is Mike Franklin, and I'm here at the invitation of the Cloquet Area Chamber to conduct interviews with candidates today, and I'm pleased to be joined by Pete Radosevich. Pete is a candidate for the Minnesota House. Pete, if you could just introduce yourself and give a brief opening statement so folks know who you are.
Sure. I'm Pete Radosevich. I'm an attorney. My office is out in Esko. I've been working here in Cloquet area for the last 25 years or so as an attorney. I started at the Newbie office. While I've been in town, I've been involved in just about everything there is to be involved in our community. Most notably, I started a restaurant in Esko called Esko Pizza Pies. That was about 20-some years ago. Recently sold that place. I also started a newspaper a few years ago called the Pine Knot News with Janet Peterson and Rose Chu, and that newspaper has really just brought back a local news source to the community. I also operate Cat 7 on behalf of the city, so the channel that you're watching this on is the station that I help operate, although I'm stepping back while I'm running for office. The reason I'm running is I'm very involved in the community, and I want to serve the good people of Carleton County and the rest of 11A. And I also am running because the guy who's got the job now just he's not really doing a very good job. He doesn't really quite understand how the system works. He's been ineffective in the legislature, and it's really caused some problems in our community, most notably for the funding for the jail, which was, we had a $23 million funding, bonding fund for our jail construction, and he kind of blew that. He ended up getting $10 million, but only with the help of county commissioners and a representative from a different district. It was actually bizarre, frankly. And you'll hear him later today take credit for the $10 million that he got, when actually it was Dave Lislegard who got $10 million. What he should be taking credit for is losing the $23 million. And I can tell you that if I had been in the legislature, that would not have happened. But that's why I'm running. I want to serve the community. People who know me know that that's what I do. They know that I'm a Democrat, but that I'm a moderate who listens to all sides. And I try to find solutions rather than shout slogans and say all the things that you hear on the TV stations and all the other candidates are saying. I really do solve problems, and that's why I'm running for the legislature.
Very good. Thank you for that. This is the Chamber of Commerce. Question on business climate. As a business person, what would you say to other businesses on the need for a competitive business climate in Minnesota, and how can we work to improve on that competitiveness if you're in the legislature next year?
We know that there's a balance between government and business, and it's a delicate balance that it's essential to keep things moving smoothly. I'm a pro-business Democrat. I believe that businesses supply the jobs and the economic opportunities in our community that are desperately needed, especially in a rural community like Carleton County. And so I understand that what we need to do is make sure that we foster our policy towards developing businesses and allowing smaller businesses to grow, as well as taking care of the large businesses in our community. I'm staunchly pro-labor, and I'm going to tell you something I've noticed when I ran for the legislature 2 years ago. So I'm driving all through Carleton County. I'm going up people's driveways. I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and you drive up a person's driveway, and they've got a nice driveway, and you pull up, and they've got playground equipment, and they've got a nice house. And then you ask them what they do for a living, and they say, well, I work at SAPI, or I work at the USG. And it dawned on me a couple of months later when my kids and I were driving through rural West Virginia, where the conditions are horrible. People live in tar shack houses, and they have terrible health problems, and everything looks just like it's been in a war zone. And my kids are saying, well, they have the same industry here in West Virginia, mining and that type of thing, as we have in Cloquet, wood products. And the difference is organized collective bargaining. And so what we know is that when we have strong collective bargaining, organized labor, that they work with the businesses to provide good, solid jobs that bring up our entire community. And the beauty of the system is that the people who own the factories are still rich. So we know that there's a way that people can invest and develop their businesses, even large businesses like SAPI. A few years ago, SAPI was ready to move out of town, and they decided they would rather stay in Cloquet, pay the high Minnesota taxes, pay the high Minnesota wages, because the workforce was so good, it was to their benefit. Mm-hmm. SAPI was ready to move out of town and decided they would rather invest, I don't remember what it was, a small fortune in the Cloquet community. And the reason is that we've got a good workforce. So when you drive around Carleton County and you see the benefits of organized labor and collective bargaining, and the benefits that the business owners have by having such a good, solid workforce, it brings the entire community up, which is why Carleton County and 11A is such a great place to live and work.
Thank you for that answer. On to government spending. There's been large increases in spending. I don't think that's a subjective statement in the past couple of years. In fact, our budget forecast now shows spending growth rather, outpacing revenue growth. If you were to take office in a deficit situation, how do you balance that? How do you square that circle from your perspective?
Well, here's what happened. We had a healthy business climate. Post-COVID, things started getting better. We had all this projected budget surplus, and the legislature decided this was a good time to spend it. And I was opposed to the massive amounts of spending that the rest of my caucus did. You'll hear ads, they're formula ads. You hear them on the radio, and they say, Pete Radosevich spent $730 million on an office building. Pete Radosevich is going to take your Social Security. Pete Radosevich will do all these terrible things with the tax increases. And they're laughable. Because had I been in the legislature when this stuff was happening, I would have advocated for a larger return of the budget surplus. When I was campaigning, I said that we should be returning a third of that money to the people. And had I been in the legislature, I would have advocated and worked hard to get the Democrat trifecta to return a third of that budget surplus to the people in the form of tax breaks and refunds, because that's where it belonged. Then a third of that money should have been spent on projects and investments. Same thing you would do if you got a big bonus at the end of the year. You put some money aside, you might build that new porch you've always wanted, might replace the refrigerator that's getting old, and then that's what you would do with such a big bonus. And that's what we should have done with the surplus. Had I been a part of that process, I could have advocated more fiercely to get that accomplished. And I would have. The guy who's got the job now is going to come in next, and he's going to complain about how the Democrats spent the money. But he was in the legislature, and he didn't do a thing about it. All he's going to do is complain about how ineffective he was, but blame somebody else.
Thank you for that answer. On that tax side of the equation, Minnesota has 4 individual income tax rates, the top rate of which, 9.85%, is 6th highest in the nation. If this tax does continue to generate large surpluses, do you think that lowering rates is important, or something else with that?
Minnesota is a high-tax state, but it's also a high-quality state of living. We have good education systems. We've got good transportation. We've got a high quality of living. We've got clean government. One of the beautiful things about Minnesota is that we are high-taxed, but we have clean government. We don't want to trade lower taxes for dirty government. You want low taxes? Go live in a place like West Virginia, where you can't drive on the roads, where we don't take care of the people who are sick or ill, where we've got crooked government. We do have high taxes in Minnesota, that's true. And I do think that we need to reduce the tax burden on Minnesotans. So, you talk about the 4 tax brackets. I think the tax brackets are probably appropriate. What I do think is that it's smart to sort of move those numbers up a little bit. You're going to hear people say anecdotally that people are moving from Minnesota because of the high taxes, and that's BS. That's just not really happening. Businesses and corporations, especially the big ones in Minnesota, are reinvesting in Minnesota. They want to stay here. So to me, it seems the smart thing to do is to make sure that the money that we are taxing our citizens is being spent efficiently and effectively. And when that happens, we will see growth and we will see slightly lower taxes. I agree, Minnesota taxes are too high, but you're not going to hear me say that we need to slash taxes, because when that happens, we're going to lose the quality of life that we really do have here in Minnesota.
Thank you for that answer. Moving on, education and childcare, perhaps one of the biggest, if not the biggest, line items in the state budget goes to our K-12 system. Do you think that's an appropriate level, or what thoughts might you bring to bear on K-12 spending should you be elected?
Well, education in Minnesota is a core government function. It's one of the things that the government is supposed to do. We're supposed to educate our children. In addition, we're supposed to protect them with fire and police protection. We're supposed to provide transportation. We're supposed to take care of those who need help the most through our welfare systems. And we should be taking care of our youngest people and our oldest people in society. So the idea that we have a good, strong public education system that's available for all is really kind of central to my campaign. I believe firmly that one of the reasons Minnesota is such a great place to live is because we're willing to invest in quality public education. And the benefits of that benefit more than just the students who are getting the education, it benefits society as a whole. We know that when we spend money on education in the early years, we see a direct correlation between a lower number of people who are incarcerated and needing social services in their later years. Mm-hmm. It's an easy investment to make. It's real easy to point to the schools and say we can save money there, but it's a short-term loss, short-term vision. I'm a long-term vision kind of person. I think that when we are structuring something as big and powerful as the Minnesota state government, we need to be looking towards the long term. So I value education. I think Minnesotans do as well. It's one of the reasons our state is such a great place to live.
One issue you might hear from superintendents, even after the historic investment in schools, is that along with it came a historic number of new mandates on our schools. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that? And do you agree with the premise, first of all? And if so, kind of how do you square that circle with superintendents?
Somewhat. These mandates are really a result. They've gotten very popular. They're a result of the Tim Pawlenty administration a number of years ago, when Pawlenty and his administration was stuck with a huge budget shortfall due to a decline in the economy. I felt bad for Tim Pawlenty. Frankly, even as a Democrat, I thought Pawlenty did a pretty decent job of trying to close that gap with as little pain as possible, or spreading out the pain as much as possible. But one of the tricks they used was what they call unfunded mandates. And you hear people whining and complaining about unfunded mandates all the time. Some of them are appropriate, many of them are not. But what it is, it's a government trick where the legislature says, appropriately, we want better services for students with special needs. We want transportation projects in rural Minnesota to meet these certain designs, and this is the way we want it. It's mandated, that's the way it's got to be done. And then the tax dollars don't follow. And the reason the tax dollars don't follow is because the legislature wants to pass the buck onto the counties. So the legislature, and Republicans are just as bad, if not worse, than Democrats at this, but they say, look, we didn't raise the taxes and we increased the services. Well, and the county board's got to go to their people and say, sorry, we have to raise property taxes to meet these unfunded mandates. So it's really just a lot of pointing fingers. The answer to this unfunded mandate problem is cooperation. The answer to this unfunded mandate problem is direct communication between representatives in the legislature like myself and the county boards and the cities and the other municipalities in our district in a way that we can work those issues out before going to the legislature and forcing mandates on school districts, cities, townships, and counties. And as a representative, I think my years of practicing law in Carleton County shows that I will be working with all sides, whether they are Democrats or Republicans, to make sure that we are passing appropriate legislation that's going to work for all the people of the district.
Thank you. We're here with Pete Radosevich, as a candidate for Minnesota House, District 11A. We're talking about education right now. One follow-up education question, and then a bit of a transition. One of the accomplishments of the last legislature was the school meal and early childhood programs that was passed. Do you support those programs? And if the funding were to dry up from the federal government, for example, that arguably helped to underwrite those programs initially. Where do you
school lunch programs?
The school lunch programs.
Yeah, there's no federal funding for that. Well, the school lunch program. It's funny because I hear Republicans whining about that all the time. Oh my gosh, what are we doing feeding the children? What a horrible thing to say. We send our kids to school for nearly 8 hours a day, and we're not going to give them lunch in the middle of it. That's absurd. No Republican I know ever goes to a conference outside the city and then is told at noon during their conference that lunch is on your own. Did you bring lunch from home? They feed you. You go to a conference, they feed you. You go to school, we should feed them. It's really a fundamental thing that feeding children. Do you have any kids?
I have 4.
They get hungry all the time, aren't they? And we're going to send them to school without feeding them? What are you thinking? That's terrible. So it makes me laugh when that's the biggest thing Republicans complain about is that Democrats are feeding children. Oh, how horrible. So I firmly believe in the program. I will say that it needs to be worked on, though, because the food that kids are eating are done on a low bid basis, and it really needs to be worked on. The food's really not very good most of the time, or too much of the time, I should say. But let's go back to the early childhood issue.
Thank you.
When we get down to children who are, there's all-day kindergarten now, and we want to see children in the school systems even earlier than that. But The reason I support these kind of measures is because the key to rural economic development in places like Carleton County is the ability for people to have children, to families have children, and both parents be allowed to work. What we often see is that a family will get started and they have children, and it's typically the mother who stays home with the kids, and then they decide to have a second child or even a third child, and all of a sudden the mother is out of the workforce for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. In their early 20s, they'll go back in the workforce until they're in their early 30s. They're that much behind in the advancement of their careers, if that's what they're planning to do. And we see a big disparity between women's income, the gender equity gap, income gap, and a lot of it is because it's difficult to find childcare. Mm-hmm. I personally know people in this community who don't work because they can't afford childcare, or it just doesn't make sense to go work because childcare is so expensive. So the idea that we could foster a community where childcare is more readily available for people who want to go and work in the workforce at an earlier time, I'll tell you what, my friend, I would like to have on my gravestone, I want to say Pete Radosevich solved the child care problem. That's what I wanted to say. And it's going to take long-range vision. You'll hear people who say what we need to do is throw a bunch of money at the child care providers. And that might work for a couple of years, but then what? We see tax increases and the net gains don't equal the investment. We need to be thinking long-term about setting up a structure where early child care is available to families so that they are available to go out and work and get into the workforce. We'll see an increase in rural economic development. We aren't going to see development in the rural communities if people aren't able to go to work. And in the long term, we could solve that problem.
Thank you, Pete. Moving on to health care, one of the top issues for a generation now. Yeah. One of the issues that was discussed at the legislature was a state or federally run public option. Well, at the legislature, a state-run public option,
sure.
Various flavors of that would be available to all people that would compete with the private sector, or that would, in some versions of it, replace the private sector. What are your thoughts on one or more versions of what might be called a single-payer or a Medicare for all type of a program?
People who have watched my cable access TV show Harry's Gang for many years, or read my newspaper column, coincidentally also called Harry's Gang, even though my name is Pete Radosevich.
I was on that show when I was 12 years old. Yeah, I might have been on with you, with Harry. Yeah,
with Harry, Grandpa Newbie? Oh, very cool. Well, you'll have to tell me why later.
Will, yeah.
Grandpa was a great guy, did a lot for my career here in town. But if you're familiar with that program, you're familiar with my viewpoints on it. It took me a long time to come around to a single-payer health care plan. And I said for a long time that Obamacare was a good start, a poor program, but a good start. Mm-hmm. And we need to sort of have that long-range vision again. The Republicans are actually in favor of Obamacare. They're actually in favor of a single-payer health plan. What they're angry about is that a Democrat, and even a black Democrat, came up with the process and had it named after him. That's really what they're upset about. So if we can figure out a way to work together and decide that we need to start working towards a solution to the health care problem in America and in Minnesota, we will come up with a solution. We've got to pinpoint what the issues are and what the problem is. So I believe that, again, just like child care, throwing a bunch of money at the problem is not going to solve the problem. What we need to do is that we need to have a long-range vision. We need to have a goal that we will work towards on trying to ensure that more people are covered with health care. We know that after Obamacare came into place, what happened was people started living better and healthier lives, and it was a success by that measure. We saw children doing better in schools because of it, and we saw the reduced need for things like jails, juvenile delinquency centers, and other social services programs. So it's a good investment. It just needs a lot of work. But I want to go back to child care. Much like I said, child care is a key to rural economic development. So is health care. If we can provide a more affordable health care option to people, as well as child care to people who want to work in the workforce, we will see rural economic development. We will see our small towns throughout Carleton County, Kettle River, Cromwell, Sturgeon Lake, Barnum, we will see an increase in people wanting to live and work in these areas because they'll be able to make a living doing it, and they'll be able to provide adequate health care and schooling for their children. It's a win-win.
And Obamacare was obviously a national program, but with heavy state involvement. You see Minnesota taking a next step. If you were elected, you would advocate for that.
I would like to see a nice long-term strategy with a carefully laid out plan that works towards a solution to the health care problem. Yes, absolutely.
All right, thank you. The other side of the health is the human services. It's probably maybe the second biggest line item in the state budget. What are there changes in that, or changes either to the funding or to the programs that you'd like to see coming from the human services budget from the state?
No, not specifically. As an attorney, I work in these systems fairly frequently, and it is amazing the work that human services does in our community. We take care of people in so many different areas and so many different things that you don't even normally often think about. I'll give you a quick example. Do you know what civil commitment is? When someone is exhibiting mental health issues so severe that they can't take care of themselves, they become a danger to themselves or others. In the Duluth area that we are in now, 6 to 10 people a week are civilly committed. That's how many people. Is that crazy? I started working for the court system on these issues once in a while, and I was shocked. I had no idea how much work that human services does in our community that we don't even know or think about. And we've got excellent service providers, at least up here in northeastern Minnesota. We do. We take care of our old people. We take care of our young people. Minnesota is a great community for taking care of people who need it, and I'd like to see that continued. Of course, there are oftentimes projects and problems that come up that we need to address in human services, and if we don't, if we let them slip under the rug, they will turn into huge and larger problems. So it's always wise to have a legislative oversight over what Health and Human Services is doing statewide, and I firmly advocate for that as well.
All right. Thank you for that. You mentioned seniors. We have entered the silver tsunami, as it was once called, with a large aging population.
Yep.
How are we doing as a state in caring for that demographic, especially as they get older and their need for services increases?
Well, we're doing pretty good, frankly, but there's a lot of problems that we have that we need to solve. I'll give you an example. Over at Interfaith in Carleton, there's an entire wing that's completely empty. Sunnyside Nursing Home, adjacent to the hospital here in Cloquet, closed down. They can't find enough workers, and they aren't being reimbursed properly or adequately enough to make them financially viable. Now, these Interfaith and the Cloquet Community Memorial Hospital are both nonprofit organizations that are not out to deliver dividends for their stockholders. They're community-owned, they're nonprofit organizations. They don't need to make a profit, but they do need to break even, and they need to be financially solvent. And when they can't provide a service like nursing home services to our citizens, there's a problem that needs to be fixed, and we need to address that, and we need to address it soon. And we really do need to address it soon. And I'm not just saying that because I'm rapidly approaching that age, where I'm going to need those services. I do see that long range, we need to solve the child care and the elder care problem. And I've got a bunch of ideas on how to do it and how to work towards that goal. One is that we want to make those positions and those jobs for people who want to make a career out of them. Lots of people want to make a career out of helping old people and young people. But the wages and the benefits that come with those jobs just aren't there. And I think that we can solve that problem if we realize that we can have better workers who want to make a career out of that type of work with proper benefits and wages that the state believes is a value. Our society puts a value on it. We should put a value on it and stick to it.
Very good.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. An issue that came up in my conversation with our candidates, both candidates for county board, is housing. And the city, the county have demonstrated a housing need across all sectors, most acutely in the workforce and working class and affordable housing sectors. What are your thoughts on how the state can take an approach to that problem that would help our community?
Well, one thing that the state needs to make sure they don't do is they can't start throwing money at the problem. Mm-hmm. That's a huge issue. You will see Democrats who are going to want to add house buying credits, funding availabilities, and that type of thing, and for first-time homeowners and that type of thing, to see an increase in home ownership. And what typically happens when that happens is the prices of houses rise. When all of a sudden someone's getting a $10,000 gift from the government to buy a house, the value of the house increases $10,000. And where does that money go? It goes to people who are already rich selling these houses, which I don't have any problem with that necessarily, but it's evidence that those programs don't work. As a Democrat, I think the smart plan is, again, long-range vision and planning, so that we're looking down the road and thinking about what is the long-range solution to the housing problem. One of them is zoning. We want to be able to see more multifamily housing in areas that are often zoned for simply one-family residences. Another issue is that we see this constant expansion, especially in rural Minnesota communities like Cloquet and Carleton. We see this expansion of the core city out into the areas around the city where you can get a little bit larger land and you're not so clustered together. What happens is that hollows out the insides of our community. At the same time, that infrastructure, the roads, the power lines, the sewer lines, the water lines, all still need to be maintained, yet they're still expanding out into those rural areas, which is very, very expensive. I think it would be a good use of our money. I'm not suggesting this, but I'm suggesting that we look at the idea that there's a way that it's possible that we could take 2 or 3 internal city lots, maybe tear down the houses like the AEOA used to do in the 70s on the Iron Range with those old dilapidated mining houses, and then convert those lots into a single-family house, which a much bigger yard. It'll keep the core of the city closer to the center of the infrastructure. People who still want to live in the country still can, but they shouldn't expect the city services like city water and city sewer as readily as you would get inside the city. And that will open up housing options for people. That's one idea. But the answer to this problem, the answer to the housing problem, again, is a long-range vision where we identify the problems and come up with a solution rather than shouting slogans about what should be done.
I think we only have a few minutes left.
I'll use them up.
I bet. And I'm happy about that because you mentioned the long-range vision. As a general matter, we seem to be incapable of that or far less capable of that than previous generations. And to me, and perhaps to you, I'm curious about your thoughts, is that related to our particularly polarized time that we are living in? And how do those two work together, this ability to set a long-range vision and to work across the aisle with folks from various political tribes or parties?
Sure. People who know me, and a lot of people know this about me, the concept of being a Democrat or a Republican is really sort of ancillary to the idea that we're going to be serving our community. I'm planning to be elected to the legislature. I'm planning to win this race and be in the legislature in 2025. And when that happens, I'm going to have to realize that roughly half of the people in my district lean conservative. We really are a diverse community in Carleton County where half the people are liberals, half the people are conservatives. And the people who elect me are the ones who put me in the office. But the people that I serve are everybody in the community. And if I'm not aware of the issues that are seriously affecting the other half, so to speak, I'm really doing a disservice to the entire state and the legislature by doing that. And we see way too much of it. We see way too many people who are the guy who's got the job now is only representing the Republican Party. He gives no consideration to the ideas of the Democrats, none whatsoever. And that is part of the problem. It's a big part of the problem. We can run as a Democrat like I'm doing, but when I'm elected, I'm a representative who's representing the people of my district, not the party leaders in St. Paul. People know that about me. That's the way I've operated. When I've been involved with the chamber, that's what I've done. When I've been involved with other groups, that's what I've done. Looking at the complete solution, looking at what's best for the constituency that we're trying to serve is the answer to the problem. Less partisanship is only going to be good for our communities. We know that.
Thank you for that answer. I guess for our final question, could you give a bit of a closing argument? I'm sure you've given a few in your time. Could you give a closing argument to our viewers as to why they should vote for you this fall or this month?
Sure. Well, it's just kind of repeating everything I've already said. People who know me, who read my newspaper column, people who have watched Harry's Game over the years, people who have worked with me as an attorney or on committees and boards that I've been on over the years, know that my solution, that my approach is to look at solutions. My approach is to try to figure out what is the problem that we're trying to solve exactly, and how do we solve it? It's a solution. You'll hear people shout slogans all the time. Slogans are ineffective. They don't mean anything. They're simply slogans. What I like to do is see how do we solve the problem? And we start analyzing what the problem is and working towards a solution is when we all benefit. My experience as an attorney, as a small business owner, as a citizen of the community has shown and proven that that's my approach towards leadership, and that's what I'll do if I'm in the legislature.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Pete Radosevich, Democratic candidate for House District 11A. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back with another candidate. We'll take a small break here.